Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to crack open the planet's energy budget. We're going to follow that invisible current of energy that powers literally everything, from a tiny blade of grass all the way up to the biggest whale in the ocean. So, let's dive in.
Seriously, just for a second, think about the last thing you ate. Where did the energy in that sandwich or that apple actually come from? Well, the answer is pretty incredible. It takes us right into the engine room of our planet, and it all boils down to one central idea.
And that big idea is productivity. Probably the best way to think about it is like a speedometer for an entire ecosystem. It's not just about how much life is out there, it's about how fast new living stuff, what scientists call biomass, is being created. It's all about the rate.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the energy paycheck that plants get from the sun. Then we'll see what's actually left over for lunch. After that, we'll follow that energy up to the consumers, see how they use it to grow, get the lingo right, and finally, wrap it all up by looking at why this is so incredibly important for all of us. Okay, first things first, we have to start at the foundation of it all. We're talking about primary productivity, which is basically the work done by the producers. The plants, the algae, the organisms that form the absolute base of every single food chain.
So picture plants as these little solar-powered factories. The total amount of energy they capture from sunlight and turn into chemical energy is what we call gross primary productivity, or GPP for short. And the paycheck analogy is perfect here. GPP is like the gross pay for the entire ecosystem. It's the total amount earned before any taxes or deductions are taken out.
But of course, just like you and me, plants don't get to keep their whole paycheck. They've got bills to pay. They have to use a big chunk of that energy just to stay alive, for respiration, for maintenance, all their basic life functions. These are their living expenses, which scientists refer to as respiratory losses, or just R.
So if plants are using up all this energy just to live, that begs a really, really important question. What's actually left over for everybody else in the ecosystem to eat? What's on the menu?
And that leftover energy, that's what we call net primary productivity, or NPP. This is what's left after the plant has paid all its energy bills. And this number, it's the most important one of all. It's the take-home pay that the ecosystem gets to spend. It's the energy that becomes new leaves, new stems, new roots, and that's the energy that's available for everything else to eat. And it all comes down to this really simple formula, which is just our paycheck analogy in math form. The gross primary productivity, the total paycheck, minus respiration, the living expenses, equals the net primary productivity, or take-home pay. It really is that straightforward.
And look, this isn't just some abstract concept for a textbook. NPP is everything. It is the literal foundation for every food chain and food web on Earth. Without it, you don't have herbivores, you don't have carnivores, you don't have decomposers, you've got nothing.
All right, so the producers have done their part. They've created that take-home pay of energy, the NPP. So now it's the consumer's turn. It's time for the animals that eat those plants to get their share. And that brings us to what we call secondary productivity.
Now think about this. When a rabbit eats a carrot, it doesn't actually use every single bit of that carrot's energy. A lot of that material just passes right through. The amount of energy that is actually absorbed by the consumer's body is what we call gross secondary productivity, or GSP. We figure it out by taking the total food eaten and subtracting whatever's lost as waste. Let's make this super clear with an example. Take a look at this table. Let's say our consumer eats 200 grams of food. Right off the bat, a full 100 grams of that is lost as waste. Then, it burns another 67 grams on respiration, just staying alive, which leaves only 33 grams for actual growth. Now, let's walk through the math together and see how these numbers shake out.
So, step 1, we find the gross secondary productivity. We take the 200 grams of food that was eaten, and we subtract the 100 grams that was lost as waste. Simple math. That leaves us with a GSP of 100 grams. So, that's the total amount of energy that was actually absorbed and was available for the animal to use.
But wait, just like the plants, this consumer has its own living expenses, right? It has to breathe, it has to move around, it has to stay warm. So, not all of that 100 grams it absorbed can be turned into new muscle or tissue. We still need to find the final net gain.
And that net gain is called net secondary productivity, or NSP. This is the good stuff. This is the energy that actually gets stored as new biomass in the consumer's body. It's what allows them to grow bigger, and it's the energy that becomes available to the next predator up the food chain. And here's the final calculation. We start with our GSP, those 100 grams that were absorbed. We subtract the 67 grams the animal used for its own respiration, its own living expenses. And what do we have left? 33 grams. That is the net secondary productivity, the actual growth. And look, it matches our table perfect.
Okay, let's pause for a second. This next part is really, really important, especially if you're studying this for a class or an exam. To talk about this stuff like a scientist, you've got to use the right language, and that means using the correct units.
See, productivity is a rate, so it always includes a unit of time, which is usually per year. Now here's the key difference. On land, we measure it by area, so something like grams per square meter per year. But in water, like an ocean or a lake, life exists in 3D, right? So it makes a lot more sense to measure it by volume, like kilograms per cubic meter per year. Getting that area versus volume distinction right is a total pro tip.
All right, so we've gone through the formulas, we've learned the terms, but what's the big deal? So what? Why does any of this matter outside of a biology class? Well, it turns out that understanding productivity is absolutely fundamental to understanding our place on this planet.
Net primary productivity isn't just a number on a page. It's the planet's renewable resource budget. In nature, it's what feeds the entire food web, plain and simple. But for us humans, it's the food on our plates, the wood we use to build houses, the fibers in our clothes. Every single one of us and every other animal on Earth is competing for a slice of the planet's total NPP pie.
And that leaves us with one final and really critical question. Since we all, humans, animals, everyone, depend on this one finite energy budget, how do we manage our own needs for food and fuel and resources in a way that doesn't completely bankrupt the ecosystems we rely on? How do we make sure there's enough to go around for everybody? That's the challenge, and it's right at the heart of sustainability.